Trump walked by when a man saluted, but that salute stopped the president in his tracks. Before we begin, let us know in the comments, where in the world are you watching from? And don't forget to subscribe for more powerful real-life stories that inspire. The sun was just beginning to slip behind the rooftops of Manhattan, turning the sky into soft hues of gold and lavender. At the corner of 5th Avenue and 56th Street, just across from a food cart selling salted pretzels, sat an old man on a worn wooden bench. He wore a faded olive jacket. On his cap, navy blue and slightly frayed, were the embroidered words, USS John Paul Jones, DDG 53. Most people walked past him without a glance. A few offered a polite nod. None realized who he was. Retired Chief Petty Officer Walter Briggs had been sitting on that same bench every Thursday for the last 12 years, always at 6 p.m., always facing the flag hanging above Trump Tower's entrance. He said it calmed his nerves. He never asked for anything, never begged, never spoke much. But his eyes held stories, deep ones, and his posture, even at 70 still, carried the rigidity of command. That evening, the usual New York noise played around him. Sirens, distant jazz, taxis honking without rhythm. He paid it no mind. But the city's rhythm paused, for just a second, when a small crowd began to gather across the street. Phones came out. Murmurs rose. A black SUV had pulled up in front of Trump Tower, and stepping out was none other than former President Donald J. Trump, flanked by his usual Secret Service agents. He was heading in for a private fundraiser, waving politely to those filming him, when something, or someone, caught his eye. His pace slowed. His eyes narrowed. And then he crossed the street. The agents hesitated, unsure, but followed. The crowd followed too. Walter didn't move, didn't look up. He was focused on the small American flag pin in his hand, rubbing it like a habit. "Excuse me, sir," a familiar voice said, firm but not aggressive. Walter finally looked up. Trump stood before him, not the booming, podium-dominating figure seen on TV. Just a man in a navy overcoat, eyes filled with something softer than politics, recognition maybe. "You served," Trump said. It wasn't a question. Walter nodded once. 34 years, Navy." Trump extended his hand. "Then let me say this properly. Thank you, sailor." Walter looked at the hand for a beat too long, then stood, slowly, bones cracking. He took the handshake. "Didn't think anyone remembered us," Walter muttered. "I never forget our warriors," Trump replied. "Not ever." What followed was unexpected. The crowd, usually divided, stood silent, phones lowered. There, in the middle of New York rush hour, two men, divided by status, joined by service, shared a handshake that spoke volumes. But for Walter, this moment was just the beginning, because the next day, a letter would arrive at his apartment, signed personally by Donald Trump, and inside it, a request that would change everything. The envelope was thick, crisp, and bore the golden seal of the office of Donald J. Trump. It slid under Walter Briggs' apartment door at precisely 8:12 a.m., resting on the worn doormat that still said, "Welcome aboard," from his Navy days. He almost didn't see it. He'd been halfway through his morning routine, black coffee, 3 push-ups, and 1 glance at the front page, when the shadow caught his eye. Walter picked up the envelope with a frown. No stamp, no courier slip, just his name in bold ink. Walter Briggs, CPO, RT. He stood at his kitchen counter, the smell of old wood and tobacco lingering in the air. His hand hovered over the flap for a moment before he carefully opened it with a pocket knife. The blade had his initials carved on it, a retirement gift from his squad. Inside was a single page, thick cardstock, typed with precision. "Chief Briggs, our conversation yesterday stayed with me. Men like you built this country, and I intend to make sure we never forget that. If you're willing, I'd like you to be a part of something we're launching. An advisory board made up of retired service members. It won't be political. It will be patriotic. We're not asking for speeches or endorsements. We're asking for your voice, your wisdom, and your eyes on the ground. If you're interested, a car will be waiting Friday at 0900. No obligations if you choose otherwise. Respectfully, Donald J. Trump. Walter read it 3 times, then a 4th. He stared at the signature. It wasn't a stamp. It was ink. Real. Personal. He set the letter down and stared out the window. New York buzzed beneath him, chaotic, proud, noisy. But in that moment, all he could hear were memories. Fallujah, 2004. A Storm at Sea, 1992. That final salute at his wife's funeral, 2011. He had buried a lifetime of service under a quiet bench routine, and now somehow he was being pulled back into something bigger. That Friday, he wore the same uniform he kept in a garment bag, untouched for over a decade. It still fit, barely. He straightened his tie 3 times, polished his shoes, looked in the mirror and didn't recognize the man, but the posture was familiar. The black SUV arrived exactly at 0900. The driver, a young Marine, stepped out and opened the door without a word. Walter nodded and got in. They drove in silence. The city faded behind them, replaced by a private entrance near the East River. The gate opened with a scan of the Marine's ID. Inside, a converted federal building now bore the sign, Veterans Advisory Coalition, Founders Briefing Room. As he stepped out of the car, Walter spotted 5 others entering from different directions. One wore an Air Force lapel pin. Another had the rigid gait of a Marine with 2 replaced hips. They looked at each other, nodded with quiet understanding, the way soldiers do. Inside, the room smelled of leather, history, and purpose, and standing at the front, not with a microphone but a folder in hand, was Donald Trump. He smiled as Walter entered. "Chief," he said warmly, "I knew you'd come." Walter didn't smile, but he nodded once. "Let's get to work." This wasn't a ceremony. It was a mission, and it had only just begun. The meeting room wasn't a press stage. There were no cameras, no aides scribbling notes. Just a long, polished oak table, 6 leather chairs, a coffee pot that looked like it had been there since the Reagan years, and a wall lined with photos of fallen heroes. Walter Briggs took the seat furthest from the window. Old habit. He never liked his back exposed. Around him, 5 other veterans settled in. The room felt like a submarine, tight, focused, and heavy with silence. Trump stood at the head of the table. No teleprompter, no suit jacket, just the former president in a white shirt with rolled sleeves flipping through a file with military precision. "Gentlemen," he began, and I use that term with every ounce of respect, "it's good to have you here." No one responded, but they didn't need to. In that room, silence was its own form of discipline. Trump continued, "We've got a problem in this country. It's not just politics, it's memory. People forget who built the roads they drive, on the bridges they cross, the freedom they breathe. They forget men like you." He turned to the wall of photos. "And men like them." A beat passed. Walter's eyes landed on a photo in the corner. A young Navy SEAL named Jackson Cole. He'd known him, trained him actually. Jackson didn't come home from Kandahar. Now his photo hung here, just one of dozens. Trump snapped the file closed. "So we're doing something different. You're not here to march or campaign. You're here to advise." Quietly, intelligently, and when needed, loudly, he gestured to a younger man who stepped forward. "This is Brent, former Army Intel. He's our liaison. You tell him what you see, schools, communities, policy blind spots. And he gets it to me, directly." Walter leaned forward. "So, you want us to be your eyes and ears?" Trump smiled. "I want you to be the conscience they can't ignore." Another veteran, Major Ed Ramsey, airborne mid-70s, still sharp, spoke for the first time. "We're not politicians. And I'm not asking you to be," Trump replied. "I'm asking you to be something rarer. Patriots with scars, voices with weight." There was a long pause. Then, slowly, Walter nodded. "So, what's first?" Trump tapped the file. "There's a school district in Arizona stripping military references from its curriculum. History books rewritten, medals erased from lesson plans." Another vet, Sergeant First Class Luis Morales, clenched his jaw. "My son goes to school in that state." Trump handed him a folder. "Then maybe you should help them remember what valor looks like." For the next hour, the veterans reviewed documents, policy drafts, whistleblower reports, intelligence, summaries. Brent took notes, fast but quiet, like a man who knew how to listen. When the meeting ended, no one stood immediately. Instead, they lingered, because something had shifted. They weren't just retired anymore. They were engaged. Walter
walked out last.
As he stepped into the hallway, Trump caught up. "You know," he said, "you've got a way of making silence feel louder than speeches." Walter smirked. "You talk enough for both of us." Trump chuckled. "Fair enough." Then he added, more seriously, "I meant what I said, Chief. This country needs your kind. They just don't know it yet." Walter gave a slight nod and walked toward the exit. He didn't say it out loud, but for the first time in years, he felt like he was reporting for duty again. Walter didn't fly to Arizona alone. Sergeant Morales insisted on joining him. His son's school was one of the ones in question. They landed in Phoenix just before noon. Dry heat, endless sky, and tension that settled like dust in the corners of the airport. The school district had been quiet. Too quiet. No press releases, no interviews, just a sudden policy change. All military-related posters removed. Veterans Day assemblies cancelled. A lesson plan leaked online replaced Medal of Honor recipients with peaceful conflict resolution icons. The media hadn't touched it yet, but Walter had seen this before. Erasure came quietly, with paperwork and polite smiles. When they entered the school board office, the receptionist didn't look up. "You'll need an appointment." Walter leaned forward. "We're here to speak with the superintendent." "Walter Briggs, retired U.S. Navy. This is Sergeant Luis Morales. His son goes here." The woman finally looked up, then down at Walter's. "Military ID." Something shifted in her posture. "Let me check if he's available." The waiting room was lined with student artwork, but Walter noticed what was missing. No flag, no Pledge of Allegiance poster, no mention of veterans. Just motivational phrases printed in pastel fonts. Morales paced. "My son's been coming home confused," he muttered. "Says his teacher told the class that warriors belong in museums, not classrooms. He asked me if I was outdated." Walter clenched his fists. "They're not just changing the lesson plan. They're changing the meaning of service." The superintendent finally arrived. Polished suit, polite smile. "Gentlemen, how can I help?" Walter didn't sit. "We're here because you're erasing the legacy of people who bled for this country, and we want to know why." The man raised his hands. "It's not erasure, Mr. Briggs. It's modernization. We're promoting peace, inclusivity, and forward-thinking education," Morales snapped. "By calling veterans outdated?" "There's no such messaging," the superintendent said quickly. "Perhaps some teachers misinterpreted the guidance." "We read the guidance," Walter interrupted. "You scrubbed the word hero from 5 units. You removed all references to battlefield leadership and replaced them with community consensus models. That's not interpretation, that's policy." The superintendent faltered. "We didn't expect pushback from your community because you thought we'd stay quiet," Walter said. He leaned across the table, his voice firm. "We didn't fight for a country that forgets its defenders." The room fell silent. Later that evening, Walter and Morales stood outside the school. Parents began arriving, quiet at first, then louder as the news spread. Brent had already mobilized local veteran groups. A flag-raising ceremony was planned. Press would be there by morning. A student walked past Walter, backpack sagging off one shoulder. He glanced up. "Are you in the military?" "Was," Walter said with a soft smile. The boy hesitated. "Thanks. My grandpa was too, but they don't talk about it here anymore." Walter knelt down slightly. "Then it's time we change that, kid." As the sun dipped behind the Arizona horizon, Walter looked at Morales. "This isn't just about a school district." Morales nodded. "It's about remembering who we are." And for the first time in years, Walter felt it again. That quiet hum in his chest. Not rage, not nostalgia, duty. By morning, the school's parking lot was no longer quiet. Dozens of veterans stood in formation, their boots aligned on hot pavement, forming a living wall in front of the main entrance. Flags waved, brass buttons gleamed. Some wore dress uniforms. Others arrived in jeans and faded ball caps with unit patches. All of them had one thing in common: they came to be seen. Walter stood at the front, Morales at his side. Cameras clicked, microphones extended. Local news had shown up, and within an hour, a national feed picked up the story. Veterans protest school district's erasure of military history. "We're not here to disrupt," Walter told the first reporter. "We're here to remind." Parents began arriving too, some nervous, others defiant. A few teachers peered from behind curtains. The superintendent hadn't shown up, but someone else had. A black SUV rolled up to the curb just past 9 a.m. Two Secret Service agents stepped out first. Then came the former president, Donald J. Trump. He wasn't wearing a suit this time, just a dark windbreaker with an American flag pin and the words "Commander-in-Chief" stitched over the heart. For a second, the crowd froze. Then Walter stepped forward. Trump walked right up to him, extended a hand. "I heard what you did," Trump said, "and I want to shake the hand of the man who reminded them who the real heroes are." Walter didn't flinch. He took the hand. "Mr. President," he said calmly. Trump turned to the cameras, then back to the crowd. "They want to erase our strength, rewrite our history. But that ends here, right here, because men like you don't let that happen." There was a surge of applause. A few teachers stepped outside, unsure of what they were seeing. Students watched through windows. One of them, a girl in ROTC uniform, saluted from the entrance. Walter noticed. He saluted back. "I don't speak for politics," Walter said later in a brief statement. "But I do speak for every soldier whose name is carved in stone. For every flag folded and handed to a crying mother. That memory isn't political. It's sacred." Trump didn't interrupt. He just nodded. By noon, the district issued a public statement. "We recognize the importance of military history and will review recent curriculum changes." It wasn't a full reversal, but it was movement. Later that day, as the crowd dispersed, Walter stood quietly beside the school flagpole. Morales handed him a folded flag they had brought with them, one that had flown over Fallujah. Walter raised it slowly. When it reached the top, he tied the line and stepped back. The flag danced in the desert wind. Behind him, Trump approached. "You ever think about running for something?" he asked, with a smirk. Walter chuckled. "I already did my service." "Doesn't mean it's over," Trump said. Walter looked at the flag. "For now, I'll stick with reminding them why it started." The two men stood side by side, watching the colors ripple. And in that moment, party lines blurred, policies faded, and only one thing remained: the nation they'd both sworn to protect. The segment aired that night, just past 8 p.m. on national television. Fox News had run a primetime special titled "The Janitor Who Raised the Flag," and for the first time in decades, Walter Reagan's name wasn't buried in old military files or hospital intake forms. It was front and center. The report showed aerial footage of the protest, slow-motion clips of Walter shaking Trump's hand, and an emotional voiceover recounting his career, from the Navy to his post-retirement. Silence. There was no political spin, no debate panel, just reverence. But what came after surprised even Walter. Because the next morning, as he stepped outside to retrieve the paper, he saw something else on the porch. Letters, stacks of them. Some were wrapped in rubber bands, others neatly sealed. All addressed simply, Walter Reagan, the man who remembered. He picked one up and opened it. Dear Mr. Reagan, I never knew my father. He died before I was born. Your story reminded me that his memory is not lost. Thank you. Emily S., age 17. Another. Sir, I teach 6th grade civics in Kansas. We showed your video to our class. You changed how my students understand service. With respect, Mr. Adams. Walter stood still for a long time. Then he noticed something in the mailbox. A blue envelope, hand-addressed. The return address read, James A. Donovan, Secretary of Veterans Affairs. Inside was a single sheet of thick stationery and an official seal. Mr. Reagan, we are reviewing your case. Your file has been reopened. Please expect contact within 14 days. We owe you more than words. Walter didn't smile. He just folded the letter carefully and placed it in the same drawer that had held another letter, one he'd never mailed, the one he wrote to his wife after the discharge, the one he couldn't bring himself to send. Later that afternoon, Morales arrived with groceries. I saw the segment, he said. You were trending on Twitter. And the VA? That's no small thing, Walter grunted. I didn't ask for it. No, Morales replied. But maybe you finally earned the right to answer. That night, as the sun set behind the Arizona mountains, Walter sat alone at his kitchen table. He pulled out the old letter, creased and yellowed, and laid it beside the new one. 2 lifetimes, 2 versions of the same man, and for the first time, he didn't feel like hiding either, because something had shifted, not just in the country, not just in his town, but in him. He got up, grabbed his coat, and stepped outside. The neighbors across the street had hung a banner. Thank you for your service, Mr. Reagan. Another porch had lit a single candle. Walter tipped his cap. He didn't need applause. He just needed to know that someone had finally listened. And now they had. The letter came in a thick, cream-colored envelope, stamped with the White House seal. Morales had spotted it first, resting awkwardly in the rusted mailbox. He brought it in like it was made of glass. Walter didn't react at first. He simply opened it with a dull kitchen knife and read it in silence. Dear Mr. Reagan, the President of the United States requests your presence at the National Service Recognition Ceremony to be held at the Lincoln Memorial. Your story has moved a nation. It deserves to be honored in its entirety. With gratitude, Donald J. Trump. Walter placed the letter on the table. He didn't say yes, but he didn't say no either. 3 days later, Morales helped him into a dark suit that hadn't been worn in over a decade. It still fit, almost. At the airport, a black SUV with tinted windows was waiting. A young military aide greeted him with a crisp salute. Sir, it's an honor. The President is looking forward to meeting you again. Walter just nodded. Washington, D.C. was colder than he remembered. The city moved fast. Sirens, helicopters, tourists. But as his motorcade pulled into the Lincoln Memorial Plaza, everything slowed. The place was packed. Thousands of people had gathered. Veterans, families, students. Flags waved. Phones recorded. A stage had been set at the base of the monument. Walter stayed in the car until the last moment. When he finally stepped out, there was a long, collective hush. Cameras zoomed in, reporters whispered, and then, from the far end of the stage, A familiar voice echoed through the speakers. Mr. Walter Reagan, a sailor, a father, a man who never asked for anything, but gave everything. Trump walked toward him, hand extended. They met at center stage. No teleprompters. No scripts, just a handshake. The president leaned in and said something only Walter could hear. He nodded. Then Trump turned to the crowd. Today, we honor not just Walter Reagan, but every man and woman who returned home. Quietly. Those who carried scars we never saw. Who walked among us as janitors, carpenters, neighbors, while history forgot their names. Today, we remember. The audience stood. Applause thundered. Walter didn't cry. He stood straight, his cap under one arm, the other hand on his heart. Then came the music. A lone bugle began to play taps. Walter closed his eyes. Behind him, a massive American flag unfurled across the memorial steps. And in that moment, Walter Reagan wasn't invisible anymore. He was the nation's mirror, reflecting every untold story, every unsent letter, every folded flag held by a mother who never got her son back. And as the anthem rose, so did something in Walter's chest, something that had lain dormant for decades. Peace. The day after the ceremony, the phones wouldn't stop ringing. News stations, veterans organizations, schools asking for Walter to speak, documentarians requesting interviews, publishers offering to write his story. But Walter Reagan answered, none of them. He spent the morning like he always did, watering the garden, polishing the brass flagpole, folding his mail neatly before reading it. Morales shook his head with a grin. Sir, you're more famous than the governor, maybe even the president. Walter looked up from the paper. Let them have the spotlight. I had my moment. But his moment had rippled further than he expected. 2 days later, a group of local high school students showed up outside his fence, holding up a hand-painted sign. Thank you, Mr. Reagan. One of them held a bugle. He played the same melody that echoed in Washington, taps. Walter didn't say a word, but he stood, hand on heart, until the last note faded. Weeks passed. The neighborhood had changed, cleaner, quieter. The HOA officers who once barked orders now tipped their hats when they walked by. And Morales noticed something even more surprising. The new neighborhood bulletin had a section called Veterans Watch, where Walter's name topped the list. Kids left notes on his gate. Strangers dropped off baked goods. Someone even trimmed his hedges while he napped. And still, Walter remained humble. One evening, Morales found him sitting on the porch, staring at the horizon. Do you regret it? Morales asked. Not fighting back sooner. Walter took a long breath. No, timing matters. And when you speak with your hands, people fear. When you speak with your heart, people remember. He tapped his chest. I wanted to be remembered. Right. Months later, a plaque was installed at the local park. It bore a single name. Walter Reagan, U.S. Navy, retired a quiet defender of what's right. At the unveiling, Morales wheeled Walter to the front row. The mayor gave a speech. A choir sang. And just as the sun dipped below the trees, a young boy walked up to Walter, saluted clumsily, and asked, Sir, were you really a hero? Walter smiled, eyes soft. No, he said. I just didn't stop when it mattered. Back at home, Walter placed a framed copy of the plaque on his shelf, right next to a photo of his late wife. A folded flag sat beneath it. He turned off the porch light, sat down in his favorite chair, and closed his eyes. Outside, the wind whispered through the trees. Not loud, but enough to remind the world that some heroes don't wear capes. They wear time-worn jackets, carry invisible scars, and choose silence over applause. And yet, when the country needs them most, they still stand. Thank you for watching. If this story moved you, leave a comment. And subscribe. Real strength doesn't always roar. It sometimes whispers.